everyone. Welcome to another video in the Ulrich Museum of Art's series of Staff Pick Artist Talks. I'm Jo Cox, Registrar at the Ulrich, and I've selected for you today an excerpt from a talk given in 2012 by Dr. Deborah Willis on Gordon Parks in support of an exhibition happening that year. Dr. Deborah Willis was then and still is a university professor and chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at Tisch at NYU. Where she also teaches Africana studies. And in addition to being a university professor, she is a photographer herself. She's a curator, she is an author, a historian, just to name a few of her hats, which mirrors Gordon Parks because he also wore so many hats in his lifetime, right? In addition to being a photographer, he was a filmmaker, a writer, a musician, among many other things. Because Gordon Parks is perhaps most celebrated for his ability to marry documentary style photography and sort of the narrative component that is inherently present in the nature of photojournalism with such a sense of composition and thoughtfulness and sensitivity for his subjects, I think this excerpt beautifully and thoroughly outlines how specifically he went about doing that. You know, what kinds of decisions he made in framing his shots and what he chose to include with his figures in the photos to, in some cases, tell several stories simultaneously. And I believe Gordon Parks was constantly working on several planes simultaneously, socially, politically, artistically, personally. And that's why his legacy is so sacred. So I hope you all visit the full talk by Dr. Willis and enjoy this excerpt.
Roy Stryker understood racism in that city and bigotry in that city and did not prepare Gordon for that experience. And Gordon decided he was amazed and shocked by living in the city, in the nation's capital, and unable to eat at a restaurant, buy a coat, or to live to do anything that normal activity of a black man he experienced in Chicago. So he was upset about it, about the bigotry, and he said to Roy Stryker, I want to photograph this experience. How do you photograph bigotry? How do you photograph discrimination? And he didn't know how to make this happen. And Roy Stryker decided and challenged him by saying, interview the cleaning woman in the offices of the Farm Security Administration. So he spent a month with Ella Watson, and he photographed her at work, different times a day. So here he sees the American flag as an iconic moment, you know, her mop and broom placed around within it. But then he created this image, which he says that when he showed it and shared this with Roy Stryker said, you're going to get us all fired because this is not something that he expected to see. And then also creating this moment by the tools of the trade of this woman, the mop and broom, a woman who has lived in terms of poverty, but working within that experience, looking directly into the camera, not, you know, with her pin dress. So we began to see his thoughtful ways of documenting her. So I have a few images from that series where he photographed her in her home. She's raising her 3 grandchildren. She adopted a daughter, and also her husband had just recently died. So we see her as a family woman, but we also see the sense of history. As Gordon photographs, there are 2 sides to the story within his portraits. You'll see one activity on the left side and another on the right side. We see a reflective moment of this young girl seated on the bed, but also the parents of Ella Watson in terms of history of family photographs. We see a crowded flat in that experience. We see hungry children. We also see him photographing her at work and seeing the beauty of the moment of art and framing within his images in the collection here, as well as in this series with this PowerPoint, is images, we see images of mirrors. Mirrors are always reflecting ideas, but also breaking the plane, understanding that Gordon is looking beyond the activity, but looking in terms of telling a story. So we see a woman who's covering her hair as she works, but we also see him framing her in the mirror. We also see her leaving for work at 4 in the afternoon to work at night in the office building. The young children watching her leave, and also photographing her at church. A very spiritual woman. He was very active in documenting that. But at the same time, he's photographing in other places. And as we begin to see not only framing families, but we also see calendars where he gives us dates, and he sets the dates and timing of the photograph. But we also see that he's interested in generations and families. We see the great-grandmother, we see the grandmother, we see the daughter and children. So we see these planes as we see his photographs, as he tells the story about family life. Lighting is really significant for him. We see a dramatic moment as the young boy in the back, the only male figure outside of the child in the frame. So Gordon is constantly telling us stories how families use framing of the calendar, to experience their daily lives. We also see in Washington, D.C., 7th Street in an area of Washington, 7th and Florida Avenue, outside of a shoe shop and a hat shop. We see the sense of dandyism. We see the sense as he places a photographing over on the man's shoulder, but looking at a dandy, looking at the sense of style that happens in this city. We also see that he looks at workers and laborers as monumental, that work is important to men and to their families, and as well to women. We see him carrying this rope and the glove in hand. And so he looks at his subjects in a serious way. We see mothers in the bathroom in terms of their housing, washing the hands of their child, and then play. How he looks at play and recreation in this community of poverty, but also in the community of family life. A dance class in the Anacostia community. Prayer is central in terms of documenting. We see photographing Ella Watson in her church, but also a daily prayer as a meal is prepared. Fascinating with the stacks of white bread, the potatoes, a man with his family. We see a sense of pride as he documents them standing over the table, their heads bowed, and a sense of grace and appreciation. Another image of a worker, a construction worker, the pencil in his hat, the way that Gordon documents him looking up, his face in terms of this open space of a man for the future, a man who's living and working in a segregated community, but has a sense of self and identity.